a lot of interviews that I've listened, you always speak about how nothing is about you, right? When people share, well, when they speak about your experience and what you've been doing, what you've been accomplishing, you always say that, it's not only about you, it's about the other people that you are trying to, help them. Is this how you have always been thinking about things growing up?
Yes, I think culturally in South Sudanese society, especially among the Nilotics people, it is emphasized that individual is not important. What is important in the society is the community, and you model yourself according to the values and the norms that the society is trying to promote. And for me, when I went through all those experiences that I went through, first of all, it wasn't just me alone. There were like hundreds of thousands of other children, maybe even millions of other children that were going through the same thing. And many, many more probably had it worse than I did. So comparatively, my experiences were not that bad. When I say it's not about me, is because when you think about during that period, uh, the tragedy that people face, is something that affected every single person. So, when it comes to the extreme problems that come with warfare, a lot of South Sudanese children had it worse than I did. So it's not even about my individual experiences, because comparatively, I came off pretty good. And then also when I do the work that I do, is because I don't want something like that to continue to happen to every other generation that comes. So it's not about me, and it's not even about our generation in particular, but it is about having a sense of how painful and impactful those experiences were for us individually and for our colleagues, and wanting to shield the next generation from similarly terrible experiences.
Was the thinking that, you are not the only one going through the experiences that you're going through as a child? Was that the reason that, was that something that motivated you and kept you going during such hard times?
Yes, there is resilience in collective struggles. Is one thing when you are. This is why usually dictators or those who are extremely ruthless, what they do is they isolate you from society, and that is more painful. But even if you are struggling and you have terrible experiences, but you are going through it together, you see other people, then through that by itself, helps you to endure, because you see other people doing it, and by default, you have to do it, and you do it together. And then there is resilience, there is support, and then there is that bond that is created by the experience. So yes, it's something that really forge, a sense of collective history, collective experience, which is very important in politics and in building nations, because those are from which myth are formed, that become bedrocks of countries.
That's right. And but what was your personal experience as a child, growing up in an environment that had ongoing civil wars?
So what happened was, so at the time, there was a lot of children that were joining the war and wanted to be child soldiers. But the SPLM did not really need them, because they had a lot of volunteers, a lot of adult young men that were joining the liberation struggle to go and fight the war against the North Sudanese regime. So what they did with these children were to create schools and camps for them. They got from among them those who used to be teachers, who were now soldiers. They got them to come and teach these children. And then they realized that, they can just indoctrinate them and talk to them about the ideas. At least for the adults, Some of them, when they joined, they already had their own political parties and they had their own political ideologies. So they were not necessarily pure in a sense. But here with children, many of them had never been politically active, and they were joining because of the realities of war due to internal displacements, their parents being killed or separated from them. So it provided them an opportunity to be able to indoctrinate them in a unique way. So now they made a policy out of it. And all the different commanders were instructed to specifically recruit children across different parts of the country and send them to Ethiopia, where they were mixed, and then they were put in their own camps. They were run by the SPLM. These were the group that were called the Red Army. And you remember this was during the Cold War. And SPLM being supported by the Derg regime of Ethiopia, which was then relying on the Soviet Union, had to play into that politics of Marxism. So we were called the Red Army, and what happened was, these were like basically like military cadets schools where you learn basic survival skills, basic infantry skills. But then, the situation changed quite dramatically. The Tigrayan rebels who were fighting the Ethiopian government all of a sudden emerged victorious and captured Addis Ababa in 1991. So this forced us to flee, and what was funny, we were being supported by the Ethiopian government, and the TPLF was being supported by the Sudanese government. So now they were victorious. So they kicked us out, and we started having internal problems. And our movement was basically almost dead. So around this time, SPLM really suffered, and a lot of displacements, internal fighting. And although SPLM back then never really used child soldiers, now because it had lost so many soldiers and has lost so much territory and so much logistics, it began using child soldiers, right? So a lot of this group of the Red Army in the 1990s became child soldiers. Now, for me, that experience was mostly in a defensive positions, not in an offensive scale. So, and then I my father prevailed on me, that I was, that I need to go to school, The whole concept of the Red Army, by the way, was that if the war lasts long, then these children, which they now recruited, they will send them to schools, and then they will graduate, and then they will come back, and they will form the bedrock of the new cadre that you need to rebuild the nation. So now they were prevailing on us to go to refugee camps, and there was an active program by the SPLM to take majority of the Red Army to Kakuma refugee camp. So I went there. This is in the northern Kenya. And then from there is when I got the opportunity to travel to the United States as part of the Lost Boys and the Lost Girls of Sudan program. But initially, during those experiences in the Red Army, this was intense. This was kids basically on their own, building their own houses, taking care of themselves, and in an environment where they were not vaccinated and people had come from different parts of Sudan. All kinds of diseases were spreading among them, and people were dying like flies. So quite really terrible, dramatic experiences. And then during the war too, having to defend one's life and fighting to be able to survive. Those are harsh realities that we want to shield the next generation of South Sudanese, and in fact, Africans from ever going through again.
And the civil war has, it started in the 1950s. That's a very long time. And it's so unfortunate that it hasn't gotten the international attention that it probably deserved.
No, this is the problem, and is one of the things that you have seen, my friend, when it comes to issues affecting Africa. They don't get much international coverage as issues that are affecting other parts of the world. You can even see now with the recent situation in Israel and Palestine. And people are like, what? Tigray? There was something going on in Tigray? You know, and as if like there was nothing going on. And the war has been going on there and in Ethiopia, you know, the Sudan, you know, everywhere. So it's a real unfortunate situation. And it's one of the reasons why we have to develop our own ways of telling our stories and our own priorities to the world so that people really know what is happening. So yeah, it's quite unfortunate. The Civil War first started in 1955. It went on for 17 years until 1972. A lot of people were killed. Estimated 1.5 million people were killed during that war. And then it ended with a peace agreement that basically recognized some form of like, you know, government in the South, not really autonomous, but a government in the South. Southerners were demanding federalism. They didn't get it, but they got to have their own regional government. And it was a democratic government, you know, one of the very best in Africa, performed very well. In fact, a sitting executive lost an election to an opposition candidate and peacefully handed power. This was in the 90s.
In Africa.
Rarely happened. It was only one of the three democracies at the time. Kenya was a one-party state at this time. Tanzania was one-party state. Most of these were one-party state with presidents that proclaimed themselves president for life. You know, Uganda was under Amin Dada. You know, so you know, so it was a very, very well functioning. But the problem was there was this northern control of the state and meddling of the North in the internal politics of the South. Even when the South has made it clear where it want to go politically, the North would always find a way to intervene through the presidential orders. And this anger people, and you know, the intention behind those intervention was always malicious. It was aimed at dividing the people of South Sudan, or trying to extract our resources, or get territory from the South to the North. And the broader philosophy of the North was essentially to try to build a homogeneous society in the Sudan. You know, they defined like nation state. You know, this is a old school definition of nation state as people that speak common language, have common religion, common values, you know, and all of these things. Some of these are important, but they cannot be enforced. You know, they have to develop on their own. They have to be organic. And in the Northern Sudanese elites wanted to build a homogeneous society that was based on Islamic values and Arabic culture. Now, we are Africans. We don't have any Islamic values. We are Christian. So there was automatically a clash. And for them, they were so narrow-minded in understanding of this. They did not understand, you know, the importance of diversity of beliefs, diversity of cultures, diversity of language, in creating a melting pot. You know, countries like the United States and many countries in the world are very heterogeneous societies, and they have created a way of celebrating that diversity and building commonalities around it, especially around the values of freedom, respect, dignity, and so forth. So this is what we wanted, but we were unable to get it at the time. And the dictator at the time, President Jaffar Nimeri, imposed Sharia law on the Southern Christians who had nothing to do with you know, Hadith or Quran or Muhammad or any of these characters. So it was quite unfortunate. So the result was immediately resistance. And what is interesting about this, actually, you know, this is a role that South Sudan has played actually for most of its history, is being a barrier, preventing, you know, corruption of that, you know, pristine African identity that was rooted along the Nile. So we managed to do that, and that's what led to the Second War in 1983. And that war now is the war that many of us became involved. The objective was to transform Sudan, to make sure that Sudan is a nation in which all its people are equal, are the same. But the problem is the northern elites who had taken power since independence in 1956 have always defined themselves along this Arab Islamic worldview and want to impose this on everybody. And the thinking is sectarian, because you have two major subdivisions of Islam. You have the Ansars that follow the Mahdi, and you have the Katamiyas that follow the Merghanis, and they have all these internal issues that many of us in the South don't care about. So they think in this sectarian, almost like a caste system. And in the worldview, we, the Southern Sudanese, especially Southern Africans, were at the bottom. So we could never become president. We could never rise to anything. So we're like, look, you can't have a country like this. You have to have a country where people are treated based on their dignity, based on their character, not based on some narrow, if you're not a Muslim or Arab, you can do it. We're like, why would we want to be in such a country, right? We will be accepting to be second-class citizens in our own country. Why would we do that? So we asked for transformation of Sudan so that Sudan become a country in which people are equal, people are the same, people are treated with respect, treated with dignity. People are judged based on the content of their character. The Northerners refused. They wanted to have a Sudan in which they were privileged. And it was not the totality of the Northern people, but there were a privileged ruling class, especially from Central Sudan, that have always seen themselves as the rulers and the upper class of the society. They rejected this, and they wanted us to remain a second-class citizen, and obviously we refused. So we created our own country. This is how South Sudan came to be an independent country. Now, when we created this country, we were always like, let's remember, why did we create this country? What led to us creating this country? It was to create a society that can allow each one of us to prosper to the best of our abilities, to have a government that can help us, walk with us, accompany us, to persevere through the challenges of life in search of ourselves and in realization of our true potential. So we wanted to create that government, and this is where we had challenges ever since, with the current leadership completely losing direction and being committed only to remaining in power. That is the only objective. And we have had this now for 18 years. We have been independent for 12 years, and we have not been making any progress. In fact, we have been retrogressing. We have been going backward. Poverty is increasing. All the different indicators are going wrong direction. Enrollment rates are, going backwards. Hunger rates are worse than they ever been. You are looking at very, very, very terrible indicators. And now, with the crisis in Sudan, majority of our refugees who were in Sudan are being forced to return to the south. So it's complexities of challenges, but at the root of it has been the lack of leadership, especially by our current government, to stay true to the cause of the struggle. And the reason why people of South Sudan went to war for all that time to fight for their own country, it was to bring about a free society in which they can prosper.
And so what is it that made the people of South Sudan lose direction?
Well, the problem is, when we started the war in 1983, we had a lot of different problems. First of all, there were so many different rebel groups that were in the bush. Some of them had gone to war because of their own ethnic issues. Some of them have gone to war because they have problem with another group. Some of them have a philosophy that they want to liberate the country. Some of them want to make sure South Sudan was independent. So there was just a bunch of them in the bush. And when John Garang, Salva Kiir, and the current group that became the dominant group, when they went to the bush, they assembled all of this group, and they were supposed to work together. And there was a leadership that was agreed. The problem was John Garang was very charismatic. And when he went to Ethiopia and they met with the dictator of Ethiopia, Mengistu Haile Mariam, Mengistu liked John Garang, and they connected. And Mengistu was a dictator, right? This is a guy that overthrew Emperor Haile Selassie and murdered him. Like Mengistu personally murdered Haile Selassie using a pillow. So this is the guy. So South Sudanese here come from a democratic culture, right? And they have agreed to have this body. And here is Mengistu, who's a dictator, who has basically killed off all of his rivals in the Derg. Derg was initially a committee that was formed by the Ethiopian military to look at some of the internal problems that were emerging within the military during the time of the emperor, especially the protests that happened in the early 70s. So he ended up emerging. So he is a dictator. So he liked John Garang and basically wanted John Garang to be the leader. So John Garang had this opportunity that he couldn't refuse. So he returned back. And when the colleagues decide that the whole thing should be done democratically and should be election, John Garang boycotts the election. And then they had Ethiopian troops come, and then he had some of his troops already armed, and they declare John Garang the leader, and they form the leadership, and they start shooting at the other guys. That was the end of the story. So here, although John Garang, don't get me wrong, was a great leader, someone that we are extremely proud. The problem was that he didn't come in a legitimate way, right? So without that legitimacy, there was already issue, right? So some groups, most of the group went away. But John Garang controlled the only foreign supply of arms, and South Sudan doesn't make weapons. So because he was the only source of arms, he was able to subdue all the others, and he was also competent. But now within the organization, dictatorship has been planted at the center of it. So over time, if you try to deviate from whatever, you disappear or you are arrested. So now other commanders that want to challenge John Garang, the only way you do it is doing it violently and then moving away with your troops. This is what Riek Machar did in 1991 and a bunch of other troops. So this subjected the SPLM to all this upheaval and infighting. So John Garang now tried to be democratic. So he organized a convention, but it was a convention where he was the only candidate, right? So it's not really democratic. So, but he showed that he was competent in running the organization, looking for arms, leading the war. And then Salva Kiir was his guy that was doing the dirty work. This was the guy that was disappearing guys, the guy that was shooting people. But he was not necessarily the guy was thinking. It was the guy that was the muscle. Now, John Garang died tragically, and the muscle is now in the leadership position. And all he knows is the muscle. He doesn't know the other nuance that John Garang used to play democratically, because John Garang used both. He used the muscle, but he also, played the political game. But this guy now was only just the muscle. And he didn't have this education like John Garang did. John Garang had a PhD from Iowa in economics. Salva Kiir probably didn't finish primary school. Okay. So different calibers, right? John Garang, a visionary. This guy is a very, very insecure guy because he was not supposed to be there. So he's always looking behind his shoulders. He doesn't want to be surrounded by smart people. John Garang wants to be surrounded by smart people, but he doesn't want you to express your opinion in public. He wants you to come and tell him. This guy doesn't want to hear anything that is smarter than what he has, because then he's feeling insecure that you will be able to take him out. So he has no vision, has no competence to follow the vision that John Grant had laid down. And then also, he's a guy that has many character weaknesses, right? We all have this, right? Greed. So you like want money, women, these pleasures of life. So he had no time to govern. He's only pursuing these things. And because he's pursuing these things, and these are the things that attract not your best and brightest. So all of a sudden, he finds himself surrounded by criminals, charlatans, and prostitutes. And this is his crew. So the only thing that ended up happening is corruption. This is what you see now, like South Sudan just becoming the most corrupt country in the world, right? And degradation of our values, right? We used to be some of the most respected people in the world. Now we are just, doing all kind of like nonsense. Can you believe, like the other day, the president, he came here to the US, met with some random charlatans. I don't know where he found them. And then they returned to their country and announced that they had signed a $3.2 billion oil investment deal with an American company. Turned out that the company was, this was a complete sham, right? And they themselves had to walk it back. The Minister of Finance has to walk it back. It was just so embarrassing. And then the office of the president had to delete the story, because they posted on their Facebook page. So, the country is so broke because they have sold the oil in advance and nobody is giving them any more loans. They have sold every single thing that they can find. They're selling it right now, because the leadership has no direction and it has no values that underpin it. It's being run by criminals, by, individuals that are corrupt, individuals that are basically thieves at the very core of who they are, and people that don't care about anyone else. They think like the fox. In Dinka, we have a story that say that Fox, apparently Fox, it was the only child, and he was very happy about this. The mother and the father were having difficulty having other children, and he was always celebrating. And then the people say, Fox, you don't care? You don't want you to have other siblings? He said, nah, I don't care, man. Like if they have any other child or not, as long as I'm there, as long as they were able to produce me, I don't care about anything else. So this is like this guy, he doesn't care if there is posterity or not, it just for him to be in the leadership, to be in power as we speak. That is all that he cares about. And that's why the country has lost direction, because if there is no leadership from the top, if the guy that is sitting at the top is sending wrong signals, rewarding thieving, stealing, corruption, all these vices, and punishing virtues, bravery, courage, good ideas, then the society is going to be corrupted.
I believe that, the South Sudanese the people had virtue, right? And so I don't believe they have lost everything that they believed in. And so with everything that's going on, how are the people reacting to it?
People are almost broken. People have been subjected to poverty that they have never even imagined. Even when we used to be with the Sudan, what you are seeing in South Sudan has never happened. There were always that, dignity. Everyone was independent. There was peace. You could go to your farm. You could head your cattle. There was no climate change like what we have now. There's drought constantly. And then you have a government that doesn't care, that doesn't help in any way. So people have moved to the urban centers and they're preying on each other. They're like eating each other alive. That is what's happening because the state doesn't exist. Communities are fighting. You have youth from one tribe will organize to go and attack another tribe so that they can raid cattle, abduct women and children. This is what is happening. So it's a situation because the state is unable to shoulder the responsibility of governing, and you have a leader who is completely unable to manage the country, unable to manage the situation, but who is imposing himself because you want to have access to resources. You want to be rich, and he has made deals that in which he has sold the country's wealth to all kinds of foreigners and all kinds of entities, and he wants to just be there. People are dying literally on his watch, and he's not lifting a finger.
And so, I mean, these are terrible things that are happening, and it's hard to believe that it's not getting. I mean, everything that is happening, everything that is going on doesn't get any attention, and people don't even know what the hell is going on in South Sudan. I mean, because it's terrible.
Yeah, man. They say Sudan is having bigger problems. Ethiopia is having bigger problems. Somalia is having bigger problems. Yeah, South Sudan is just at the bottom of the list, right?
Why is it that the story of South Sudan isn't just being told by, I mean, anyone? Like, no one is speaking about it.
Because people are disappointed, to be honest with you, my brother. Look, when we became independent, everybody in the world was so proud of us, because we struggled with dignity. We were united with a purpose. We persevered, and then we succeeded. We created our country. Everybody in the world was cheering us on. But when we turn on each other and we start killing each other and we start corrupting our country, we start showing this very, very, very ugly image to the world, people lost interest in who we are. So this is the problem. Part of here in DC, this is what I find. I meet with people all the time. They feel so sorry that things have turned out that way. It's not what they would wanted, but the thing is this: there are so many problems in the world, and it's true. South Sudan, it's a very tiny country. It doesn't have a lot to offer to major countries in the world. So people were interested in us because of the dignity of our struggle and the ideals that we ignited in the imagination of the people of the world. Those who love freedom, those who love dignity, those who appreciate those who struggle and aspire for those very same ideals. So those guys were united. But then the minute that they realized that we were not genuine, this is not really what we care about, and our president began showing this ugly image to the world, starting to embarrass us on the world stage, disappearing people, killing people, showing this utter disregard for human life. We showed an ugliness that the world does not want to see. And the world never realized that we were capable of this. I've only heard the one part of the story, that we were the victim of it, but they didn't realize that we were also perpetrators of the same.
So, I mean, as someone who, you fought for this, right? You were in the front line fighting for independence for South Sudan. Doesn't it break your heart seeing what's going on right now and the sacrifices that the people made? And now it's almost as if it's all for nothing.
Yeah, it's terrible. But that is why we have to do something about it. Like, you cannot just break your heart and then you go home and sit. Then you have completely allowed them to trump over the struggle itself. You have a duty and an obligation to stand up. This is the unfortunate thing about the liberation movement in Africa. All of them, like when we went to the bush, I must admit, I have no idea what the hell was happening, right? It was my father that signed me up. Okay. My father signed me up. Sometimes you join, you don't know why you are joining, but you find yourself there. It happened. When you look at all the rebellions in the world, all the movements, liberation movements in the world, not everybody joined exactly for the same reasons, right? Yeah. Some guys are getting away from the law. Some guys, they think they're going to make money. Some guys are the one motivated by the cause. Some guys just want to kill people, and they all join. And then they go and find themselves in that movement. And then what happens in it is now the ethos that the leadership instill in the core, right? Because if the bad guys are at the top, you will become like these bandits that you find in West Africa. Like, these are not even real rebels. Like, I joke to my West African friends that they don't really know the concept of rebellion. They have banditry, but like rebellion, they don't understand. This one, you really have to organize a proper army, like in the exact image of the army that you are opposing, and you go to war. So that requires values. You see, that is really what is the most important. Those values, those norms, those are the most important thing. So when you find in these rebel groups, you find people that join for different kinds of things. And if the bad guys are the one that end up with the leadership, they're going to emphasize the bad values, the corrupt. They're going to steal. This is why you find rebel groups, they rob. Sometimes they rob civilians. They inflict violence on civilians. Why? For all kinds of reasons. And sometimes it's just to take the materials from the civilians. And you find that the rebel groups that do this the most are not the ones that are led by leaders that are truly committed to the ideals for which they have taken up arms. You see? So within the SPLM, this was always part of the problem, right? And SPLM never managed to build because of these contradictions that it had: lack of legitimacy, lack of, secession plan, inability to tolerate divergent views, Because of those things, it had never really built a professional movement, right? Like I talk about this as inability to manage internal issues, inability to make internal decisions, right? It's very important for an organization, for especially a political movement, because even if violence is very central to it, violence is not politics. There is a huge difference between violence and politics. Violence rely on implements, and that what's her name? Hannah Arendt. Yes, she talked about this in her work. Politics is ability of people to collectively organize and pursue a common cause. Violence, one terrorist can get a nuclear device and blow up Manhattan. It's something that just relies on implements, and that's not political.
Right.
So here, sometimes the mistake, and this is what happened in the SPLM. SPLM ended up relying on violence, to use violence to do things that it did not want to do politically. And you can never substitute politics. If you try to get a shortcut, it's going to wait for you up there. And what South Sudan needs is nation building. It requires political consensus, negotiation of a constitution, of a social contract. It can be done violently. It requires politics. And Salva Kiir right now doesn't want to tolerate that, because he has built on this thing within the SPLM. This has been the culture. And this is what you find in other movements. You find in NRM in Uganda. You used to find it in TPLF. You used to find it is there in Eritrea. You find it in South Africa. You find all these liberation movements. They allow individuals to subvert, the ethos of the organization. You find it in Zimbabwe with ZANU. ZANU's PR is just insane. You don't even know anymore what is liberating about it. They become like the complete opposite of the very apartheid regime that they went to war to oppose. And this is what has happened with the SPLM. And this is why, like, we had to create a different political party, so that we are able to revive those values, the values for which we went to war. Because those are the values that are going to allow us to be different and to build a future in which our people are at the center, not the leaders, not any of these individuals that want to advance their own narrow objectives.
So you move from Kenya and then you go to the US. What happens after that?
I came to the US and I went to school, and then after I finished school, I went back. That's what happened.
Earlier on you spoke about how one of the strategies that dictators usually use is to isolate individuals as a means of punishing them. And you went through a similar thing, right, with the solitary confinement. How did that experience shape you as a person?
I think it's made me more determined because it's given me the time to be by myself, to be alone, and to ask myself tough questions. You know, am I at peace with what I have done up to this moment? Would I do it again? Those are questions that crosses your mind, but because of the fact that you have to live in the world, you have to interact with other people, so you don't interrogate them to the logical conclusion. But when you're on your own, in a complete solitude, solitude that is meant to harm you, but which God Almighty turns into a blessings and become something that enriches you, because then you search your soul, you search your mind, you try to find the source of what it is that you are trying to pursue. And when you finish from that experience, you come more determined, because your body, your mind, your spirit, your soul are all in one, doing it together. And there is a certain satisfaction when you know that what you are doing is what you are supposed to be doing. So for me, it was supposed to weaken me, but it actually made me stronger, because I was able to have fellowship with God Almighty, to remind myself of why I'm doing what I'm doing. And, from it, I emerged much stronger, much stronger.
So after that, what goals had you set for yourself the moment you got out?
Well, is the need to expedite what that we are struggling for, and that is to realize a democratic South Sudan. This is the goal for which millions of our people sacrifice their life, and is a goal that must be realized. We have no other choice, because if we don't realize it, we are subjecting the next generation to all kinds of political crisis. You realize already what is happening in Africa. Population is growing exponentially. You have climate change that is getting out of control and creating new risks and vulnerabilities. You have new technologies that are emerging. You have cities that are becoming highly populated. You have crime that is growing and getting stronger, getting out of control, to the extent that some states may completely be taken over by criminals. In this environment, and then obviously you have the geopolitical rivalry, right? In this environment, if you continue with the same old politics, you're going to have the Africa of 1990s, where you're going to have civil war pretty much everywhere. And there will be so many youth ready to do anything. You have already Wagner Group that is now active. And what they're doing, instead of that, all that youth that is going to Europe through Libya, now they're recruiting them, right? Training them, arming them, and then they work for them. And they can use them for whatever the hell they want to use them. This now will become available to other companies. And Africa become the center of geopolitical rivalry.
Hold the situation in.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, like, we need to be way ahead of this, because we need to get our house in order. We need to resume our economic engine and growth potential, so that we get all these youth and make them a labor force instead of like a force of destruction. We need to build cities, homes, affordable housing. We need to begin dealing with the issues of climate change. Invest in making energy cheaply available. This requires leadership. It requires competent governments, competent executives who are willing and committed to realizing a different future for their countries. And for me, this is a cause that when I got out, I realized that it's something that I must help our people to realize. Because as a citizen, you never run away from service. If it is a military service, you are available. If it is a civilian service, you are available. For the last 10 years, I have been complaining about lack of leadership in South Sudan. My hope was that President Kiir will begin changing his behavior and the behavior of his regime, and that he will start doing the right thing. And that was the same thing too for Dr. Riek Machar, that they will make adjustments and correct their mistakes. But I have been disappointed over and over again. And in 2017, I reached a conclusion that these people, in fact, were the root causes of the problem, because they have divided the people, they have misled them, and now the only way in which they can remain relevant is by continuing to divide the people. Unity will result in their crimes and their misleading statements being known to the public. So they thrive on division, and I reach a conclusion that they should be removed. And we have been trying to remove them peacefully, obviously, and democratically through democratic elections. But now he's already ahead trying to rig elections before they even happen. And what we need, especially in the next 1 year, is for the African Union, for the IGAD, for the East African community to pay attention. We are going to have first ever elections in South Sudan. That should mean something for us. That should mean something to our neighbors that have always been with us, that have walked with us in this whole journey. The peace process that led to the birth of South Sudan was led by IGAD and has involved all the regional countries. So they are there to benefit from peaceful and stable South Sudan. And believe me, the South Sudan under Salva Kiir is a South Sudan that has performed extremely, extremely below its potential. And when we have a change of leadership, the opportunities that we are going to unlock in that country and in the region are going to take us to a new level of performance, of productivity, of growth. And they're going to consolidate our unity and the unity of our people and create a region that we can all be proud to call home. And it's something that I think we can do together. So these elections that Kiir is already trying to rig them, we have to find a way, a way to ensure that these elections are run by the African Union with the support of the United Nations. The United Nations already has troops in the country, over 20,000 of them. And they are fair. They are our brothers from different parts of the world. They should be the one to help us run the election. And all of us will be able to accept the results. And I know the government will say, oh, we are a sovereign nation. Yes, we are a sovereign nation, but obviously we are sovereign. And then how come do we have 20,000 UN troops in our country? We need help. And that help will also mean in running the election so that they are free and fair, and so that no group will be able to resort to violence because the election will perceive to have been rigged. So we ask the head of the Electoral Commission to reach out to the United Nations and ask for support.
So, I mean, one of the ways that you are realizing this dream, obviously, is through, the founding of Revive South Sudan Party. When I was doing my homework about you, I spoke to someone who happens to be one of your professors in university. And one of the things he said was that if South Sudan was a democratic state, you'd arguably become, you'll arguably have the opportunity to be the president because, you deserve to be. And so when you're talking about the upcoming elections, are you considering running for the office of president?
Well, that will be determined by the party. But yes, I think South Sudan needs a new president. I've been saying that for a very long time. President Kiir and Riek Machar, they have done their best. In fact, if they have anything at all to offer, they have done it. And they have nothing left, at least anything that is positive. What they have left is something that can destroy this nation, and that is something that can plunge this region into a crisis that we have not been able to experience since the end of the North-South war in Sudan, or the end of the war in Congo. There is a need for us to have elections that are genuine. And the elections that President Kiir is organizing are not. Already, as we speak, members of our party are being intimidated. They are being threatened. We have had to evacuate a number of them out of South Sudan because of security fears. The president continued to hurl threats at me, which make it questionable about the extent of my personal security inside the country. Recently, as you might have seen, President Kiir traveled to Moscow, to Russia, went and met with President Vladimir Putin, and asked Putin to support him, calling him his only friend. And he needs a powerful friend that can support him. Since his return from Moscow, there has been a number of Russian individuals, presumably from the Wagner Group, that has been witnessed in the country. This is a huge concern for us. It's a huge concern for the region. We have a region that is volatile. We have a region with a lot of crisis. We don't want this region to become a theater for some of these shenanigans that we have seen in other parts of the world or other parts of the continent. And President Kiir here is playing with a very dangerous game in extending this invitation. And for us in South Sudan, we have our friends. We know how we came to be a country. We know who stood with us, and we know who were opposed to our interests. And we know who are our friends, and we know who want to prey on us. So the president needs to be very careful here. What I know is this: there can be no free and fair elections with the Wagner Group providing security. We haven't seen it anywhere. And the countries that are now under Wagner control, if anything, the democratic indicators have been receding. So for us, we need to move forward, not backward. Our people have died long enough for the ideals of democracy. We have struggled enough for those ideals, and we are so close to realizing them. And we are not going back. We are going into a new era of freedom for all the people of South Sudan. And President Kiir as an individual cannot stand on the way of the multitudes of South Sudanese people who are united in opening a new page, a page to freedom, a page to liberty, a page to prosperity. Russia is yet to prove itself in this regard, and it has a lot of work to do at its own house, in its own neighborhood. And they would be best advised to focus on that and leave us here in our region to focus on issues that are relevant to us. Obviously, we don't mean bad to anyone, but at the end of the day, this is our country, and our country is a country that was built on the aspirations of democracy. That hope is what has kept generations of South Sudanese committed to the idea of a better tomorrow. When my great-grandfather fought the British, it was that dream that was encouraging him. And even my grandfather, when he was killed, It was to realize that South Sudan. And this is the same thing that my father and I have struggled during the liberation struggle to realize. And it's the same thing that we are still struggling. One thing that also needs to be understood is this. We understand the need for peace and the need for us to pursue our objectives peacefully. But we also realize that dictators are terrible people. And sometimes some of them cannot be removed unless by employing the same tactics upon which they prey upon the society. And those are the tactics of violence. Personally, I am not a pacifist. I have never, ever said that I was a pacifist. I believe in the strategic use of violence. I believe that violence sometimes has a role within society. And as we have seen in the case of Ukraine, sometimes you have to fight for you to be free, or even for you to live, for you to exist. So we hope never to be put in a position like that, where we would have to fight for us to exist. And as you have realized in the case of the North-South situation, we were put in a situation like that, and we were not found to be wanting of courage. So it should be very clear that what we are interested in is something that is good, something that is best for our society, something that we should all be excited to realize and to work in partnership. And President Kiir here can be a partner. But at the end of the day, it must be very, very, very clear. This nation was built on aspiration for democracy, for freedom. And there is no way whatsoever that will ever trade that hope for a total darkness of dictatorship. That will never happen in South Sudan.
I mean, I hope it will never happen. Let's assume that the elections aren't fair and free, and, well, God forbid. What is the worst that could be expected to come out of South Sudan?
I don't think there is anything worse that can be expected beyond what is already happening. Already, as we speak, this country is facing all kinds of problems: economic crisis, political crisis, civil wars. As we speak, there are a number of rebel groups that are already fighting the government. You have the NAS in Equatorial region, headed by General Thomas Shirilo. You have SUNA, which is headed by General Boy Rolnyang. There are a number of different groups, including SPLM-IO Reform, that is headed by Duertut. You have a number of different groups, okay? So you already have a crisis. You have communities that are fighting each other, that are raiding cattle, that are abducting women and children and possibly selling them in the market. So it's like a chaotic environment. You have journalists being detained, being executed by the state. You have people being disappeared, human rights activists fleeing the country, members of political parties being detained. So you have already a state of emergency, just that nobody is interested to talk about it. So what may happen is that South Sudanese people will feel tired, of this. And given that the regime is determined to rig the elections and to completely avoid any semblance of free and fair elections as we speak, if you do a meeting of more than 5 people, then you have to seek permission from the national security, and most likely they will give you an agent that will sit among you in your meeting. So how do you plan now as an opposition political movement to be able to take power when you cannot even meet? Okay, so what I worry is that as the regime closed down the few available avenues for any opportunity for nonviolent struggle to succeed, you may very well realize a violent withdrawal of confidence in the regime. And what I mean by that is, a few years ago, there was a process that was launched by President Salva Kiir called the National Dialogue, South Sudan National Dialogue. This process was meant to have to build a national consensus among South Sudanese people to discuss the root causes of the crisis that the South Sudanese people face, and to think about what is the way forward and what can be done. President Kiir announced this. It was taken to the parliament. The parliament passed it. and then the members were selected. So this was the closest that we have ever had to like a sovereign assembly that the country has had. And after years of talking and talking and talking, they finally came to a conclusion. And the conclusion was that President Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar have failed the nation, and therefore they should exit. They should exit South Sudanese politics. President Kiir could not accept. So he rejected the whole thing and shelved the resolutions. And this was something that was done by the whole society, including the armed forces. So people were expected to go on the street, but then elements of the military, especially national security, deployed tanks on the street and therefore scared off the population. So population could not go on the street. But what was clearly demonstrated was that there has been withdrawal of confidence in the government of Salva Kiir. That until that moment, that government was no longer legitimate. And the reason why it is there because the military is keeping it there. Elements of the military are keeping it there. So imagine if now there is a violent withdrawal in which those elements of the military that have kept him there meet the wrath of the people, then what? Right? And those scenarios are all possible, you know. And you may not even necessarily have to wait until elections for those things to happen, you know. Just this last week, there was like deployment of troops on the street of Juba, and they were panicking that there was going to be a coup d'etat, and a number of people have been arrested, and all these things. You see? So anything is possible. And what I know is South Sudanese people are tired. They are tired of this regime, and they want change. It's better that they allow to have such change peacefully than if violently, because they will do it, and certain individual will face enormous amounts of consequences.
So does that mean that in case the elections are not free and fair, do you think that the people are gonna, in one way or another, overthrow the government?
Yes, most likely.
I mean, it really sounds like they're tired.
Yes, they're tired.
I mean, I'm glad that they still hold true the values that they started with when they are fighting for the liberation.
It's the only way they can reclaim their own dignity internationally, you know, as people of South Sudan. They have to be able to get rid of this regime. And if they can't get rid of this regime, it's difficult for them to be respected. I don't know if our people understand that, but that is really the challenge that we face. You know, until we overthrow this regime and show that we are different from this regime, people are always going to look at us from the image that this regime has created.
And that's not the image that the people have.
No, absolutely not. You know, the people of South Sudan are the most generous people. You know, they're like your people, my brother, in Arusha. I remember when I visited your city and met your people, some of them, the most kindest people, and they call you Ndugu, and they really mean it. You know, you're like a brother to them. So kind and so generous with your time, you know. South Sudanese people are like that. Hospitality is one of our major values. You welcome a guest and you give him whatever he needs or she needs, and you take care of your guests. You know, you protect them with your life. You know, friendship, you know, is something that, you know, matters a lot to us. You know, respect, honesty. You know, being honest, diligence, hard work, independence. You know, these are the things that define us. And we have lost them here because we have a regime that is corrupt, that want to break the back of our people. And by breaking our back is by breaking the values that unite us and that make us strong and make us who we are. And we have to fight for that identity. You know, we did that for hundreds of years. You know, that's how, you know, we in South Sudan, as I was telling you before, you know, one of the unique things in South Sudan is the Sud. The Sud is a barrier. In Arabic, it basically means sad. It's a barrier. It's is the largest wetlands in the world, and there you have lagoons and lakes joined together. It's huge. It's big, very big, and it's about like Burundi and Rwanda put together, right? It's like in the center of South Sudan, and it's very wetland, and the Nile passes through it. So that is a barrier. Anything that comes out, even the Greek, like Herodotus, a Greek historian, Herodotus, he came all the way there, and he visited the Sud, and he could not go beyond that because it was impassable. It was a huge barrier. And even Octavian, Caesar Augustus, after he has defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, he was able to move down there, and he could not pass. It's a barrier. So Greek, Roman, the Turks, when the Turks were expanding, the British, all of these have been blocked. So we in South Sudan, we have always looked at ourselves as the people that have stopped all of these external forces from corrupting the heartland of Africa. And SUD has been part of our ability to do that, as well as the people of South Sudan. We have stopped Islam from expanding there. We have stopped all these, foreign ideas and foreign ways of doing things. We have always played that role, And right now, we are going to stop all these dictatorship and all this, influence that is happening across the Sahel, all this authoritarianism and the rise of authoritarianism in Africa. And we are going to relive the values of freedom, and we are going to unite our people behind those values. And we are going to move forward, committed to who we have always been, because it's about who we are. It's about living the world as we have always been, as we will always be. So for us, this is the essence of everything.
I agree with you. And thank you so much for also being generous with your time and sharing the story of what's going on in South Sudan.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your interest. And we hope that there will be peace and democracy in South Sudan, and the light of South Sudan may shine, and through it be able to illuminate our entire region and the continent. South Sudan, we border Central African Republic, which has already now become the regional headquarters of the Wagner Group. We border Congo, which is one of the largest countries on earth. And of course, we border Sudan, and we are very close to Chad. We live in a very strategic region, and we can connect Africa, and we need to focus internally on how we can strengthen infrastructure, how we can strengthen trade, how can we make sure that our people are interacting and they are able to move together. What Rwanda has done recently in Kenya in opening up their countries to the rest of the continent and rest of the African people is something to be extremely celebrated. And we hope that other countries in the region and in the continent adopt the same thing. We want complete integration of our people so that they are one people, they work across. We need to integrate our armies, our militaries, and focus on external problems and not be able to use armed forces and the militaries against our own people. Let's be able to solve our problems democratically in a peaceful way as brothers and sisters, and committed to the ideals of freedom. Thank you so much, my brother. It was a pleasure to join you for this conversation. I'm glad that we have been able to finally get it done.